It's amazing how many adaptations of Cage happened in the one moment. So he's very transferable. So this is a very young Yoko Ono and her husband before John Lennon, which was Toshi Ishinagi, who was also in Cage's class at the New School. And you'll see things by Toshi in the exhibition. And then Lamont Young, as it probably says, Yoko Ono's studio on Chambers Street, New York. So he did his compositions 1960, and then they were all trying to develop these conceptual leaps after that. So Lamont Young, he was very clever in these first years. He just did one or two moves which changed everything about what our sense of composition is. So this composition is 1960, and then he has all the same compositions, he calls them 1961, and then puts dates all the way through the year of those compositions. And it's very like Cage saying, you know, wherever you perform a piece, it's different. Like 433 sounds different wherever you perform it, because it's about composing the sounds of the world coming in, right? So he's saying these compositions, even if you draw a line in 1960 versus doing it in 1961, it's another piece, right? So he introduces a conceptual dimension to our sense of what a score is and what a piece is. So that's in early New York scene. Then it sort of branches out even further. This note to be held for a long time, that's one of Lamont Young's compositions 1960. Now that's very important for other things that happen. So Cage was into duration, right? Lamont Young does a score that says a note to be held for a long time. Jackson Macro does his tree. This is one of the most marvellous, interesting outcomes of duration and holding the note for a long time. It's a score, as in a musical score, but for a tree movie. So it's a camera that sticks on a tree, the same tree, for 4 or 5 hours still. And so it says select a tree, set up and focus a movie camera. So it's like a 433, everything that comes in, as the camera's sort of focused on the tree. Now, what's really beautiful is it's asterisk, tree asterisk. So it says if you don't like the tree idea, you could substitute mountain, sea, flower, or lake. So there's actually a beach version too. So anyway, this is a filmic outcome of a Cagean score model. And then very famously, you probably might have heard of this, Robert Morris's box with the sound of its own making. This is a wooden box, and Robert Morris just sawed up the wood and cut it up. He becomes famous as a minimalist artist, I'm sure you know that. But anyway, so this is one of his earliest works in the Cagean context. And he saws up this box, hammers the wood together, polishes the box, sands it down and everything, and tapes the whole process. So inside that box is a tape where you can hear hammer, 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 all this, the sound of its making. So at the time he invited Cage over to his loft in New York and said, this is my new work, come and have a look at it. And Cage sat there apparently for 2 hours listening to it, and he was incredibly honoured and thought he'd done something very clever. And so anyway, this is a sort of sonic history of Robert Morris. And by the way, the most interesting histories that are being written now about minimalism are not just the sculptural minimalism, they're including Lamont Young and then extending through Robert Morris. So it's a sound-based minimalism rather than just a sort of spatial, physical one. We're running out of time, so I'm just going to go a little faster. That's Brecht's definition of the event. If any of you are particularly interested in that, we can talk about that after. Yeah, so Brecht uses a score and then creates an art intervention into an art gallery. This is called three-chair events. In an exhibition in 1961, he puts one chair in the gallery with his name on the wall, with the scores. And then the second chair is in the bathroom of the gallery, and people just come and throw their coat and hat and whatever. And then the third chair is outside, and people don't think it's art, whatever, right? So it's sort of a very early model of institutional critique in a way, because it's the only one that's taken seriously as a work of art is the one in the gallery. And then you have the score, and you're standing in the gallery seeing the chair and seeing the score, which speaks about 3 chairs, and you say, well, where are the other 2? So it's this sort of interesting intervention into an art space. based on the score. Then Cage, after going through and dealing with all these artists from his class who are doing more indeterminacy than he is, then he develops his score called 000, which means, and you can do anything for any amount of time. It gets really, really open after that. And he dedicates it to Yoko Ono and Toshiyuki Yanagi. Fluxus. Are you all dying? I've been speaking for an hour. I don't know. I'll give you a little... I mean, you can fold some of this into conversation if you like. But basically, this I didn't discuss, but Lamont Young designed this book called An Anthology, which was that red book we saw further back, and you'll see it if you come to the exhibition, where all these early scores were collected. George Maciunas, who's the founder of Fluxus, designed that book, worked on it with Lamont Young. So he took all the scores from Cage's immediate circle in New York to Wiesbaden and started Fluxus, basically with the outcome of these early scores in New York. And then they met up with all these European artists who were doing similar things, or even American artists living in Europe. And so they had the first sort of Fluxus festival in Wiesbaden, and these are some of the scores. In the exhibition there's actually a rather rare footage of this concert in Wiesbaden in '62, done by German television, who were all very critical and sort of not very nice about the artists. But anyway, this is a performative sort of outcome of Cage. There's Lamont Young's score, Draw a Straight Line and Follow It. June Paik interprets it by dipping his head in the paint and dragging it across a scroll. And because it's sort of a very loose interpretation of Lamont Young's score, he then calls it Zen for head. A new interpretation. George Brecht does drip music. So this might be perceived also as a post-Pollock gesture, rendered acoustic. Like suddenly it's an oral piece because he's dripping and there's water and a microphone attached to the receptacle. And so Brecht does it on a very modest level. That's him doing it himself. George Maciunas, the sort of leading figure of Fluxus, does it in one of the Fluxus concerts with this reverent kind of approach in one, and he does various approaches to the score. So then towards the end of the exhibition we try and fold in and represent Cage in the 60s. These two pieces, Variations 5 and 7, are incredible engagements with technology. Variations 5 is done in collaboration with June Paik, Billy Kluver, who you might have heard of, an incredible figure, mixing artists with technology, sort of from Sweden but lives in New York, and then Stan Van der Beek, all these other people who are sort of partly one foot in the art world, one foot in the music world. So what you see here is photo cells. These tall things here are things, when you walk into an elevator and it knows when to close the doors and open the doors. They're things that, they're motion sensors, essentially. So the dancers are moving around those motion sensors and sounds coming out. So you have Cage and David Tudor here working on the sound. So it was an incredible sort of collaborative event. Now Billy Kluver will go on to make the Silver Clouds for Andy Warhol. So he's sort of dealing with Warhol and Cage and all these people all at once. And then Rauschenberg starts something called Experiments in Art and Technology with Billy Kluver, and Cage performs in that piece. It's a fantastic piece, Variation 7. He basically pulls the sounds from all over New York and pumps them into this hall. So one of the sounds is the New York Times press room, the Times coming off the press, grinding, and then another is like the garbage disposal in New York, and the trucks, crushing the garbage. So he pulls all this sound into this huge auditorium because they're working with technicians who can do much more advanced things than the artists can do. And then the last image is just this. One of the last pieces in the show is Warhol's Empire, the film Empire. Now, Warhol's very quiet about his sources. It's very interesting. Recently, they've unpacked what he called his time machines, which are all these pieces of paper and tickets and everything of what he was doing at the time. And what we see is that he knew a lot more about Cage and Fluxus and all these things than he very often spoke about. But this is a definite sort of connection. Cage did a concert of Eric Satie in New York at the Pocket Theatre in 1963. This was a very long performance, 18 hours. John Cale was in it. all these, all these sort of very cool, interesting mix of figures. They did relays, so they had to like go and have a sleep and come back and things like that. It was a very long, it was all about duration, right? So then, if you think of Jackson Macklow's Tree movie, and you think about Cage performing duration, it's not such a big leap for Warhol to do 8 hours of the Empire State Building, right? So this is less about the building than it is about pure duration, right? Or it's a mix of both. So this is one intriguing point I'm going to leave you on, because it's one of the speculations of the exhibition. I hope you find many more when you come to the show. And I think I'll stop there and be happy to answer questions if you have any. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming.